Hello, good evening. As tensions escalate in Gaza and the West Bank, Israel's military actions have sparked global concern. Despite partial detainees exchanges, hostilities persist and humanitarian conditions worsen. International efforts focus on Gaza's reconstruction, with Arab nations offering support. In a separate development, global diplomatic efforts are also focused on another crisis, like Ukraine, Russia, and the conflict there, and resolutions and strategies through UN resolutions and Russia's potential financial aid for reconstruction. Let's put these issues in focus. As the situation in Gaza and the West Bank continues to escalate, Israel's military actions have drawn global concern. Recent reports highlight the continued delays in the release of Palestinian prisoners, a key element of peace negotiations, while hostilities intensify. Despite partial exchanges of captives, the humanitarian toll remains devastating. The latest international discussions focus on the reconstruction of Gaza, with Arab nations outlining critical support plans. Amidst shifting alliances and urgent diplomatic efforts, the region faces an uncertain and volatile future. Le Monde has reported that Arab leaders in a meeting on February 21st discussed a plan to rebuild Gaza. Their proposal, to be presented at an Arab League summit on March 4th, envisions a three-stage process, providing safe zones for the displaced, reconstruction, and relaunching a political process toward a two-state solution. In the plan, Egypt would oversee security and reconstruction, funded by international donors, including the Gulf states. However, Israeli opposition to a Palestinian state and Hamas's refusal to disarm pose significant challenges to the proposal's implementation. The Trump administration has shown openness to Arab counter-proposals, but remains cautious. To provide some more analysis on the situation in Gaza and the West Bank, joining us from Occupy Jerusalem is Dr. Monir Nusseibeh, an international law professor. Welcome to the program. Thanks for being there. What do you make of these recent Israeli military operations in Gaza and the West Bank, and how do they impact the prospects for a lasting peace agreement?
Good evening to you and to your viewers. In fact, the Israeli attacks in the West Bank, as well as the ongoing assault in the Gaza Strip, is part of this genocidal campaign that Israel has been conducting since October 7th. We can notice now that Israel is focusing on the West Bank, that it is continuously displacing Palestinians from their homes. It's creating a new wave of internally displaced persons. In addition to that, Israel has been controlling the checkpoints and intensifying the checkpoints in the West Bank in a way that paralyzes civilian life in the West Bank. It is very difficult these days for a Palestinian to move from one village or one city in the West Bank to the other. You will be met by a checkpoint that will keep you waiting for several hours only to cross a very short distance. This all is part of the Israeli plan that unfortunately has been supported now by Trump explicitly and openly to displace the Palestinian population from their homes, whether in the Gaza Strip or in the West Bank, including Jerusalem. this is very dangerous. It's very important that Arab leaders have met in order to uh, confirm that they would never accept the displacement of the Palestinian people, and that the Gaza Strip should be certainly rebuilt with its own civilian population.
And Dr. Nusayba, we've got these delays in the release of Palestinian prisoners. Is this going to be a problem when it comes to the negotiation process when we're looking towards a second phase of the ceasefire agreement?
Well, I believe it would. At the end of the day, it's clear that the parties would go to the second phase of the agreement once they have finished the first phase. So any of the commitments that are not being implemented from the first phase uh, probably will be an obstacle. We have seen how Israel's prevention of the machines that can remove the rubble, as well as the structures that can be used for residence, for people instead of tents in the Gaza Strip, have also, because Israel has obstructed these humanitarian and essential needs from accessing the Gaza Strip. This already was one of the obstacles to the continuation of the first phase at a certain point. I believe it's very important that both parties continue to commit to their, to implement their commitments in order to get to the second phase.
Well, talking about the reconstruction plan, is that even possible with the ongoing violence?
The reconstruction is possible if Israel allows the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip to get the needs that are needed for reconstruction. This certainly includes, machinery, heavy machinery like bulldozers and other sort of machinery, but it also, requires all the basic structural equipment and material that is needed. Israel has been preventing these materials from entering the Gaza Strip, and also preventing others from entering the Gaza Strip. I hope that this will be guaranteed in the future because, yes, the Palestinian people have been patient over the past weeks. They have indeed continued to live in their homes or in their lands without homes, unfortunately, in the rubble sites in their lands in the north and south of the Gaza Strip. However, it's essential that uh, uh, Gaza will be reconstructed for people to be able to continue living in dignity. People cannot continue living without, in tents for a prolonged period of time. When you talk to someone living right now in the Gaza Strip, they will complain that there are no, not only no hospitals and schools, but also no toilets to use, no showers. All the basic needs that a human being needs in order to survive in the Gaza Strip are not available right now as a result of the Israeli siege on the Gaza Strip that is preventing the basic needs. So it's essential. I only understand the Israeli prevention of all these basic needs from entering the Gaza Strip as part of its forcible displacement plan that it has been explicit about, and that Donald Trump has also been explicit that he supports and calls for.
And as you point out there, and you illustrate perfectly how difficult it's going to be to rebuild with the dire situation at the moment, how important is the international community when it comes to that? Not just with helping with the financials, but what else could the international community do to be involved in rebuilding Gaza and stabilizing the region?
No, it's very important, especially at the time when the United States is fully and openly supporting an ethnic cleansing plan. The international community has a greater responsibility indeed. Um, at the end of the day, the US administration can be opposed. War crimes, ethnic cleansing, crimes against humanity, and genocide have already been opposed by a large number of states until today. The International Court of Justice has been active, reviewing the Israeli genocidal campaign. The International Criminal Court as well has become active in at least in investigating and in accusing both Netanyahu and Gallant of a number of crimes against humanity and war crimes. So, with these international courts, but also with the appropriate diplomatic support in the United Nations General Assembly, in the United Nations Human Rights Council, in other international organizations, their voices will be heard. But they have to be loud right now so that this huge ethnic cleansing program does not get implemented.
I think President Trump has slightly backtracked from those statements, although he could change his mind back in a heartbeat, of course. The latest problems with the detainee exchanges, what does that signal about the delicacy, the delicate nature of this phase, the first phase of the ceasefire agreement?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, at the end of the day, it is indeed very, very delicate. It's the deal has been a complex deal. It could have been much simpler, but it was designed into phases, gradual, further negotiations while implementing, and that makes it more complex. It would have been much better if it was a simple deal of agreeing on all the elements and then implementing all the elements once together. But unfortunately, this was not what the parties agreed upon at the end of the day.
Dr. Munir Nusseibeh, always a pleasure to have you on the program, international law professor. Thank you very much for joining us. Now let's turn to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has urged the United Nations to back a draft resolution aimed at ending the Russia-Ukraine conflict. This comes as Russia's UN ambassador welcomed the proposal, which doesn't direct any criticism towards Moscow. Meanwhile, there are emerging discussions about Russia potentially using frozen funds for Ukraine's reconstruction, signaling potential shifts into diplomatic efforts to resolve the ongoing crisis. President Donald Trump has called on Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin to meet in a bid to end the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. According to the newspaper Deutsche Welle, Trump emphasized the need to test Russia's commitment to peace and explore the true nature of its demands. In an interview, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio revealed Trump's frustration with Zelensky, urging him to show more gratitude for US support. Meanwhile, Trump's national security advisor, Michael Voltz, hinted at an upcoming deal granting the US access to Ukrainian mineral resources. European leaders, including French President Macron and the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, are pushing for a peacekeeping force in Ukraine, while Chancellor Scholz of Germany and Zelensky are working toward a just peace solution. Now, to talk us through this, we have Irina Tuskaman, who's a political researcher and joining us from Washington, D.C. Thanks very much for being on the program. So we have Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, promoting this, as he calls it, simple and historic resolution at the UN. What do you make of it?
Quite frankly, the UN resolutions have been plentiful on this subject, but they have not resulted in any meaningful pressure on Russia to withdraw its troops and to put an end to its violation of international law, which started in 2014 and continues through this day and escalated during the 2022 full-scale invasion. I'm glad that Rubio considers this resolution a positive step, but it lies in stark contrast to the general rhetoric coming from this administration, which points to a significant pressure on Ukraine and not sufficient pressure on Russia. So, for all the backing for toothless international condemnations, policy on the ground, and the general conduct during these attempted negotiations matter a lot more.
And of course, I mean, what's happening at the moment is you have Rubio with this draft resolution without any consultation with Ukraine. I think Trump said only yesterday that Zelensky in any peace talks would just get in the way. How can this be taken seriously?
Unfortunately, it cannot. And a lot of this has to do less with any genuine rush towards negotiations, and certainly not with Russia's allegedly strengthened position, which actually is exactly the opposite, and more to do with Trump's resentment of Zelensky over domestic issues and investigations, and the Russia investigation and the prosecutor issue during his first term, which he has never forgiven Zelensky for. Zelensky was following Ukrainian law on that issue. The fact that Trump simply did not like it because it was not convenient to him in terms of domestic policies is unfortunately a lot of what is driving highly personal animus in these discussions, which is completely unnecessary and which undermines the credibility of U.S. position in pursuit of peace.
Trump, of course, is pressurizing Zelensky, along with his national security advisor, Michael Waltz, to sign an agreement giving the US the ownership of all the natural mineral resources below the ground in Ukraine as a kind of a payback for helping them out with billions of dollars over the last few years, with no guarantee of continuing to support them after giving up this. How would you assess the relationship between Washington and Kyiv right now?
It's quite frankly disastrous and humiliating, not for Ukraine, but for the United States, because Trump could have had a huge diplomatic win, because President Zelensky was actually the one to propose as a form of this deal to begin with. He offered voluntarily a portion of proceeds of these rare earth minerals and other natural resources in exchange for continued support, the sort of quid pro quo that Trump in general likes. But because Trump decided to take out his personal animus and also has been apparently advised by a number of his people close to him to argue from a position of Russia's strength rather than American strength, he has instead turned this deal around into a sort of personal vendetta, which Ukraine cannot accept. This particular deal is not advantageous to Ukraine in any way. The sort of payback for U.S. obligation of security guarantee to Ukraine signed under the Budapest agreement, which it has, by the way, failed to properly implement, is the sort of embarrassment that no leader of Ukraine, unless he's a Russian puppet, would ever accept, especially during wartime. And it carries no advantages paying back for the assistance that has been given and that has served the U.S. national security interests, and then providing no guarantee for continuity. What does Ukraine get out of it?
What about? Let me just. Sorry to interrupt you. What about this proposal then from the Russians, who say they really want their frozen assets back? Europe has frozen many Russian assets, and they say they would spend a proportion of that money on Ukraine's reconstruction. Of course, if they can keep the bits of Ukraine that they already have and use it for that too. Is that a better proposal from Ukraine's point of view?
Let me get one thing straight. Russia is in no position to be making these offers because this frozen funding is not there to dispense. It was frozen under sanctions because of Russia's war crimes and violations of international law. It's been a political measure by the US and other countries to freeze funding to prevent it from going to war costs, and it does not and a violator does not a violator of international law and an aggressor does not get to make offers with the funding it does not even control. So while I do agree that that funding should be going towards reparations, war costs, and reconstruction, that should be dispensed by the United States and other countries, and it is not a quote-unquote concession by Russia. Russia cannot make a concession based on money it does not possess.
Ms. Duskovan, I would imagine that you're not in favor. I don't have much truck with the talks that were recently held between Russia and the US in Saudi Arabia. But if they're not going to work, what do you suggest as a roadmap to peace?
I very much would like to commend Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who suggested as the host of these talks that Ukraine should be included in any future meetings. I think he was quite right, and I think that is the only pathway to negotiations that that could result in a durable and just peace. Anything other than that is simply not going to work, and it's an insult to the international community, to U.S. interests, to national security, and certainly to our allies around the world. Not just Ukraine, not just Europe, but anyone who depends on the U.S. to keep its obligations.
Do you think there's any chance that the European countries might release these frozen assets if President Trump tells them they should?
I don't think that Europe is going to follow Donald Trump's lead so far as US continues to freeze them out of interest, out of discussions that concern their security and interest. Europe has been debating independently of Trump's instructions what to do with this frozen funding. The issue has been complicated by legal and political issues inside Europe. Some countries have decided that a portion of it may go towards reconstruction and war costs, but not because of Russia, simply because they have control over that funding and because it would certainly be the right way to dispense the funding that would otherwise go back to Russia to perpetrate war crimes. And once again, just to be clear, Russia should have no legal or political say on this issue. It should be up to people who control that funding. Because of these legal complexities, it has been a difficult issue, but I think Trump instructing Europe will have no impact on that because those issues will not be resolved by just because of his commentary. And once again, to have goodwill to influence these sort of discussions, the US should be inclusive of its European allies on anything that concerns their collective security.
Now, you praise Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia for saying that Zelensky or Ukraine should be at the table for the next set of talks. Do you think there's any chance in the coming weeks that Russia and the US and Ukraine will sit down for talks?
Russia and US both rejected the proposal, which in my opinion is now also insulting to Saudi Arabia as the host, which can invite anybody to its table that it so chooses. So unfortunately, they are undermining their own position on these negotiations, even with the countries that are proposing to mediate this conflict. And certainly, certainly recent comments from the administration and from Russia show that they're no closer to including Ukraine than they were right before the recent Riyadh talks, which is unfortunate because without Ukraine at the table. None of what is being discussed has any legitimacy whatsoever.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we'll leave it there, but it's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you, Irina Tuskaman, a political researcher, joining us from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much indeed. And of course, here at Q News, we'll be watching closely on all the stories that we've been covering here tonight. See you next time on In Focus. Good night.